Hello, my name is Marshall Arnwine, and today I'm going to be teaching you 7 steps on how to catch winter bass. Let's go. So step 1 for catching wintertime bass would be to understand what these fish are doing during the winter. And most of the time during the winter, these fish are going to be hunkered down in cover and around drop-offs and other structures and waiting for bigger meals to come by because they're not going to waste their time on small minnows and other things like that. And most of these fish are going to be looking for warmth, any areas of warmth, or any areas with a drop-off where they can easily slip into the depth and the shallows freely. So basically this means that you have to go to the fish. The fish are not going to be moving around. You're going to have to use slower tactics. You're going to have to put the bait right in front of the fish. You are going to have to do what the fish want. So the second step for catching wintertime bass would be to use the right equipment. Now, in case of lures, I would be using deep diving crankbaits to get down into the deeper waters where the fish are hiding. I would use a jig to imitate crawdads, and I could fish it a little slower in deeper water than I could with a deep diving crankbait. I also like to use bigger curly-tailed worms because these fish are looking for bigger meals, so if you throw this in front of them, they're going to be looking for that bigger meal, and this could be it. Another one would be a trick worm with a shaky head. Shaky heads and trick worms are really nice because it's a slower bait that you can cast out there and just shake the rod tip, and that worm will vibrate, and that really gets the fish going if it's in front of them. Another one would be a Senko. A Senko works every day of the year. You can throw it anytime. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just let it sink. It's got that wobbling action. And a spinnerbait is also a very good imitation for slow dying shad. If you slow roll this through shallows, the fish are very likely to pick this up on warmer days. The third step for catching wintertime bass is to fish in the right areas. Now, really good areas for bass that they're going to be hanging out is around rocky structure and around drop-offs and any place where they can gather and find easy food, because they're not going to be wanting to go out and hunt for food in the wintertime. They're going to want to stay warm, hunker up by rocks, and do as little as they can. The next step is to repeat casts. If you're fishing and you throw into one spot and you don't catch anything or don't get a bite, that does not mean there's not fish there. Try and repeat that cast again and go even slower, or try a different technique or something, because that fish may be sitting there and he just hasn't decided he wants to move and eat your bait yet. But on that next cast, it may take 3 or 4, it may take 5 or 6, but he will eat your bait. And if you really think there's a fish around cover or a brush or a rock or something, keep throwing there. There might be a fish there. And the 5th step of catching winter bass is to just slow down in general. If you're burning in a crankbait and you're expecting to get a lot of bites during the winter, it's not going to happen. These fish are going to be super slow, and you just have to slow down. If you're fishing a fluke or a Senko, just let it sink for a minute. Let it sit on the bottom. Anything you're bottom fishing, let it sit for a minute. If it's sitting in front of that bass, he has enough time to realize that this is an easy meal and he can grab it. But if you're reeling it past him real fast, he knows that he's not going to be able to catch up to it, and he's just going to give up on it. The next step would be to upsize your bait if you're not catching him. Sometimes these bass, they're not looking for a smaller meal, so you can upsize your bait to a swim bait. I like to throw this little bluegill swim bait, and sometimes I'll chunk around this plastic worm. You see that's a big old curly tail worm. Sometimes they want those. And just change up the sizes a lot. Changing up the size can really help it can change a lot with the fish. And if you are throwing a tiny little bait and the fish are not being very active, they're not going to be looking for a smaller meal. They're going to be looking for that big bluegill or that big gizzard shad that's going to come by, and that's what you're going to be wanting throwing and imitating. So the final step would be to look for warm areas. And this is kind of obvious, but in the wintertime, those bass don't like to be cold. They don't like to sit there. So, go for those sunny areas where there's cover and everything they like, plus sun. That just makes the area even better. kind of stay away from creek channels where it's up in there in the shade. They like it to be in the warm, sunlight. And some lakes have power plants, and that can be usually a really good place to find bass, because around the waters around the power plants are usually generally a lot warmer than the rest of the lake. You can be in 30-degree water and go up next to a power plant and be in 90-degree water, and that is definitely a game changer when it comes to these winter bass.